of learning and engaging and innovating and collaborating. And well, again, we weren't in person, but I think, there was a lot to be had there. So welcome back. If you are joining us for the first time today, and as a reminder to everyone who's joining us again, we encourage you to use the Whova site to engage with other attendees, presenters, and sponsors. If you haven't checked out the community conversations yet, there are so many conversations going. Everything from what's your favorite Montana beer to what's the biggest takeaway that you had yesterday. There's ways to engage. If you're having a technical issue, please look at the FAQ troubleshooting tips in Whova. If you need any additional help, you can email, text, or call Todd Jackson, and his contact information will be in the chat here shortly. As I said, it's great to be back with you all this morning. We hope you enjoyed your time in the coffee talk for those of you that attended. This morning, I get the privilege of welcoming our good friend Jane Pavick from Wells Fargo to share a few words with us. Wells Fargo is the platinum sponsor for the conference for the 3rd year in a row. Jane, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you right now.
Great. Thanks, Katie, and good morning, everyone. I want everybody to close your eyes this morning, which I know is a dangerous thing to do in the first, 30 seconds of a session. But just think about the last time we were actually all together in person. It was in the Billings Hotel and Convention Center, I believe. And I just remember how good it felt to be sitting at a table and smelling the coffee and hearing networking. Maybe you couldn't see the stage because the person's hair in front of you blocked your view, but just wanted to look back and reflect on that. I also remember fondly the networking sessions. I remember there was an intense bingo game one night, and I think Heather McMillan from Homeward actually still owes me money she was sitting across from me at my table, and I just vaguely remember that. So Heather, next time I see you in person, maybe it was a beer that you owe me, I'm not sure. But so normally my good friend and my colleague, Katie Rollison, would be up here with me. She is my partner in crime. She is my partner in all things community related when it comes to Montana and bringing the resources of Wells Fargo to Montana. She actually got her second COVID shot last night. So she's kind of just taken an easy morning. She is watching us though, and she wanted me to extend her heartfelt hello to everyone as well. And so on behalf of the Wells Fargo family, and Katie and I just want to, again, welcome you all to day 2 of the Montana Housing Conference and this award ceremony. We really want to extend our appreciation for everyone in Montana giving us the opportunity to work with you over the last, 10 years and being able to support the important work that you do. And on behalf of our 1,100 employees that also work on the ground there in Montana, we appreciate the hard work that you did, especially coming off of 2020. We know that was a challenging year for all of us. And I think it's important to reflect back on that and to reflect again, over the years, all of the work that collaboratively, we've all been able to accomplish some solutions and bring resources to Montana to help with the housing crisis, which is what it is right now. We, again, just appreciate the work that you guys did. Reflecting back on 2019, again, I think that was also the first year that I wrote it down, the Coal Trust Homes program was actually passed in the legislative session. And I wanted to bring that up because this may be a challenging time right now. And you may be wondering, how am I going to get through, or how are we going to, be able to bring more housing options to Montana, and how are we going to keep going? But sometimes you need to look back and reflect on your success to realize that working together, you can make things happen. So just keep going and know that Wells Fargo will be there to support you. One of the main goals that Katie and I have is to bring the resources of Wells Fargo to the communities and to meet the critical credit need or community needs. So whether that be our philanthropic support, our investments, our loans, our materials that we develop, or our people. We've got some amazing people on the ground there. Many of them are on boards or committees of your organizations, and know that they are in it with their heart and their head, which is how we want to operate. So looking back is important. Reflect on your success, and then look forward and what can we do next. At Wells Fargo, we continuously evolve and try to improve our programs. to where it fits the needs of the community. So looking forward in 2021, one of our focus areas, we have 4 new focus areas, and the top one is housing affordability. And this covers everything from homelessness to home ownership. So know that we will be doing all we can to bring resources to Montana to help with that focus area. We're also looking at financial health, small business growth, and sustainability, and environmental and social governance. And throughout all of that, one thing also we're focusing on this year, and I think we've heard it a number of times from some of the speakers yesterday, is having that diversity lens and the racial equity lens. How are our programs and resources helping to bring equal access to opportunities for all Montanans, especially the underserved communities and populations? So we are looking at that. Another lens that again is taking more prominence this year is the environment and the sustainability of the work that we do. So again, I mean, those are our focus areas. Know that Wells Fargo is working hard to help you guys as much as we can. I want to thank, again, on behalf of Katie Rollison and myself, just extend our appreciation to be able to work with you guys over the years. We have the opportunity to work with some amazing people, everyone attending this conference. And so just thank you for your work, and congratulations to all the award winners. And Katie Biggs, I think I'm turning it back to you, right?
Actually, I think we're headed to Kaya, but
oh, okay.
we appreciate you and we love you.
Thanks so much, Jane and Katie Rollison. Like Katie Biggs said, Wells Fargo is a fantastic partner to so many of us in the state and such a big part of this work we do together. So thank you. We are ready to give out some awards. This is such a fun part of the conference every year. There's incredible people in this world and in this work. And we're just always so honored to recognize everybody. The awards this year are sponsored by RBC Capital Markets. So thank you to RBC for their sponsorship of the awards this year. We have quite a slate of awards to recognize, and we are going to start with our Legislator of the Year awards. Andrea Davis will be presenting these on behalf of the Montana Housing Coalition. If you are not familiar with the coalition, please visit their website and become a member. They are your voice for Montana-made housing policy at the state level. Go ahead, Andrea.
Wonderful. Oops. Sorry, I just turned off my video. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kaya. Appreciate that. And Jane, thank you for the connection and the motivation this morning. Our first award is for Senator Brian Hoeven from Great Falls. Senator Hoeven has been known for his ability to work across the aisle and get things done for Montana. In the 2021 session, Senator Hoeven successfully sponsored a bill to increase the capital gains tax relief for the owners of manufactured housing communities who sell to their residents. Senator Hoeven fearlessly sponsored bills to help residents of manufactured home parks have the opportunity to purchase their communities and limit rent increases in manufactured home communities. While these bills ultimately were not passed, we appreciate his valiant fight and the spotlight he's shown on the need to support these residents. Late in the session, Senator Hoeven took up the fight for the Montana Workforce Housing Tax Credit. He shepherded the bill out of the Senate Tax Committee, and when it was languishing in the Senate Finance and Claims, he successfully blasted it out of that committee on a 26-24 vote, and then it got passed by the Senate with the same margin. Senator Hoeven has done his homework on tax credits. He never falters in his quest for more homes and apartments affordable to working families, seniors, veterans, and those with disabilities. Thank you, Senator Hoeven, for all you have done to support affordable homes for all Montanans. Our second award is for Senator Jill Cohenauer from East Helena. Senator Cohenauer was the minority leader for the Senate in the 2021 session. Senator Cohenauer gets the connection between jobs and housing, that homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. She was passionate in the floor arguments in favor of several bills that would have created more homes and apartments for working families, winning votes from both sides of the aisle. Senator Konauer constantly supports workforce homes. She defends bills to create more homes and apartments for working families, and she has an unfailing passion and fight for the little guy. Thank you, Senator Konauer.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Senator Hoeven and Senator Covenauer. If anyone has paddles out there, for those of you on video, show some love and congrats and put your thanks in the chat as well. Love, awesome, thank you. Historically, our awards have gone to people working in the field of affordable housing, including nonprofit leaders, legislators, and lenders. This year, we want to also recognize some of the great work being done by volunteers, residents, and other leaders. So we created 2 new awards, the Housing Advocate of the Year and the Resident Leader of the Year. For Housing Advocate of the Year, we want to recognize and thank George Nikolak. I can never get your name right, George, I even practiced. Nikolakakos. Oh, George was the owner of View Vista Community in Livingston prior to selling the property to the residents in 2019. Since then, he has been a champion of the resident-owned community model, talking with other park owners about his experience selling to the residents and advocating at the state legislature in support of creating an opportunity to purchase to give residents more notice and time to become owners. As a manufactured home park owner, George sees the continued need for safe and stable homes that people can afford. As he looks toward retirement from the Montana National Guard, he is looking forward to engaging even more in housing. Thank you, George. We look forward to more and good continuing work with you. For Resident Leader of the Year, we want to recognize Cindy Newman. In 2020, Cindy emerged as a leader to fight to control the damaging impact an outside investment corporation had on her manufactured home park and neighbors. Partly because of her actions, Fannie Mae changed its lending policies for manufactured housing communities. Because of her advocacy, residents of other communities affected by the same outside investment corporation are banding together to advocate for change. She was a vocal advocate during the state legislative session and worked tirelessly with her neighbors and residents in other communities to raise up the issues they face. We honor her work, past, present, and future. Congratulations, and thank you, Cindy. Give a wave. We see you on screen today, and we're so glad you could join us. We know the work isn't done, and we are so glad you are doing this work. Thank you, and congrats. Now for our lending awards from NeighborWorks Montana. We first want to recognize our top lender of the year for 2020. Ian Ullman was previously at First Interstate Bank and recently became the VP of Mortgage Lending at Guaranteed Rate and is based in Billings. Ian has been an incredible advocate for clients seeking homeownership. He works tirelessly to ensure his clients are getting the best and most affordable financing to meet their needs. In 2020, Ian did 5 20+ loans with NeighborWorks Montana and 3 Lift loans. Ian also joined the NeighborWorks Montana board last year and is always helping us keep up to date on changes in the mortgage financing world and finding the best ways to support clients in this challenging home buying environment. Congratulations and thank you so much, Ian. Lori's giving you a "You Rock" sign. Awesome. This year, there were 2 lending institutions that tied for the number of loans they did with NeighborWorks Montana, First Interstate Bank and Stockman Bank. Thank you to Ryan Neeson, Regional Mortgage Manager, Michael Smith, Home Loan Division Sales Manager, and Brian Lubinsky, Mortgage Sales Manager from First Interstate Bank, and Teresa Morrison and Carol Holman from Stockman Bank for joining us today to accept these awards. Please extend our thanks and congratulations to your teams. We can't do this work without you, and there are so many successful homeowners out there because of what you do every day. So give a wave, all of you fantastic folks from First Interstate Bank and Stockman Bank. We so appreciate you. Cheryl, you are up next.
Well, good morning, everyone. I feel like we should have the faux Super Bowl, like football cheer in the crowds. It just feels so quiet when we're in a Zoom setting, but just imagine that it's there. So we're all cheering on the inside. As everyone's been talking about, last year was certainly not a business as usual kind of year. And so we at Montana Housing decided that our wards this year should not be business as usual either. As many of you know, Montana was one of the first states in the nation to launch a coronavirus relief fund housing assistance program. We opened ours on May 7th of 2020. And during the administration of that program, Montana Housing established relationships with nearly 70 different regional and national mortgage service companies during the CARES Act program. We also partnered with NeighborWorks Montana and partner organizations to coordinate a technical support network to assist renters and homeowners applying for the program. Nearly 2,500 Montana renters and homeowners received over $8.4 million in support. On behalf of the Montana Housing team, I would like to acknowledge some stellar individuals, including mortgage servicers and frontline staff, who assisted so many Montanans experiencing financial hardships as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. First, I would like to recognize Patricia PJ Hansen. She's been an escrow manager with First Interstate Bank for 15 years. PJ worked with Montana Housing's homeownership program manager, Vicki Bauer, and one of her first Interstate Bank borrowers and the sellers for a home to accept payments from the program, which cured the borrower's default and prevented foreclosure. This was a really complicated transaction, and it involved returned funds and issuance of replacement checks, and was completed just prior to Thanksgiving to help that family stay in their home. So really wanted to recognize PJ and thank her for her work. Second, I'd like to recognize Susan Turner with Opportunity Bank. She's the AVP Loss Mitigation Officer, and she's been with Opportunity Bank for 3 years. Susan was incredibly proactive in her communication with Montana Housing on behalf of her borrowers, and she went above and beyond to support their borrowers, get their applications in and get them processed. Susan was really familiar with the individual circumstances and financial hardships that her borrowers were experiencing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the end, she helped 19 Opportunity Bank borrowers receive over $73,000 in assistance payments to help them stay in their homes. That was an average of $3,800 per borrower. Susan and I talked on the phone many times, and we had many email exchanges. And I know she did so as well with a number of my staff after I went on maternity leave. And I just can't thank Susan enough for all of her hard work. So thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today. Next, I'd like to recognize some staff who joined the Montana Housing Technical Assistance Network. These are all staff working on the front lines, working directly with Montanans who were experiencing crisis. And the Montana Housing team is so grateful for their work. And as an aside, I started off my career on the front lines working in homeless shelter and as a housing case manager and as a property manager. These are really hard jobs. They don't pay very well. They're very stressful, and it takes really special people to do these jobs really well. So first, I'd like to start off by recognizing Courtney Loeffler with Headwaters RC&D in Butte. She's been with them for 3 years. She's been a rock star in problem solving and going above and beyond with her clients, both in the 2020 Emergency Housing Assistance Program and now in the 2021 Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Courtney's been a leader in figuring out how to get applicants through the process despite obstacles. And she continues to do whatever it takes to make sure that people in crisis are served. And she always does so with a positive energy and with a smile. So thank you so much, Courtney, for all of your hard work. Next, I'd like to thank Eric Beeson and the team at HRDC 7. HRDC 7 came into the program last year a little later in the fall in the second round of processor recruitment by NeighborWorks Montana, but they still managed to serve a significant number of clients. HRDC has already served close to 100 applicants this year, just in the month of April, and just with a single application processor. They agreed early on to serve clients in person and to devote whatever was needed to ensure that the community could access this critical program. So I'd really like to thank Eric Beeson for leading such a fantastic team at HRDC 7. Thank you, Eric, and your team. Finally, the Missoula Food Bank and Community Center had several staff and volunteers who have just been tremendous. Rebecca Paquette, Jessica Alred, and Lynn Tenen-Foss ran the program for the Missoula Food Bank and Community Center in 2020. They were leaders from the beginning and were active and engaged with their network processor partners. And they've just been great problem solvers, great processors, and are so gracious in their customer care. And I just think it's an amazing thing to partner with a food bank on a program like this. It's just stepping up into like other duties as assigned categories that you wouldn't expect a food bank to be doing. So we really appreciate the work. So I'd like to thank Courtney, Eric, Rebecca, Lynn, and Jessica for just really being the quality customer service on the front line. It's a tremendously difficult job, and we really thank you. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to recognize Michelle Rogers with NeighborWorks Montana. She's been their marketing and program specialist for the last 6 years. Michelle coordinated the NeighborWorks Montana Technical Assistance Partnership Network last year. She served as the liaison between Montana Housing and all of the partner organizations. Michelle's patient demeanor brought calm to stressful days, and her customer service to all involved, renters, homeowners, landlords, partner organizations, and Montana Housing staff, was just stellar. And we really want to thank Michelle. So thank you. It is truly because of dedicated individuals like PJ, Susan, Courtney, Eric, Rebecca, Lynn, and Jessica, and Michelle that our 2020 CARES Act Emergency Housing Assistance Program was a success. And I know many of them are continuing to support Montanans this year with our rental assistance program. Thank you all for your stellar work and going well above and beyond business as usual. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Bruce Brenstall. I'm with Montana Housing, and it's my distinct pleasure today to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to Mary Bear. Mary Bear joined the staff of Montana Housing in 1995, actually just shortly after I began working for Montana Housing. So we truly have been partners in crime for quite a few years. Previously, she worked for private banks in Montana. Her banking experience provided valuable knowledge as she began her time at Montana Housing with our accounting team. After a few years in accounting, Mary accepted a position with the home ownership team, helping families obtain their first opportunity to purchase a home. She then moved into the multifamily team, and for the last 10 years has been the manager. Mary developed relationships with our development community, board members, staff, and peers, and that has moved the multifamily team forward through many challenging times. Her ability to find solutions that were worked for all partners in the multifamily world made her the go-to person in Montana for affordable rental housing development. Mary recently retired and is spending more time with her family and the hobbies she enjoys. You know, Mary's is a peer to all of us at Montana Housing, but truly, she's really more our friend. You know, Mary has been kind of the go-to person for a lot of folks. A lot of folks would go to Mary in confidence and share their feelings and, you know, the things that were good and bad in their lives at that particular time. And Mary's always respected that confidence. Many times when I was the executive director, I'd actually talk to Mary about, so what's really going on around Montana Housing? Because Mary was the one that knew. And she's the one that cared. And she always kept those people in confidence. She's also was kind of our party girl. Many times that included a glass of wine, but other times it more was, let's play some game work and do some, you know, building with relationships amongst staff. And she was always the one that would recognize maybe someone in crisis within our staff or within our partner agencies and recognize and try to help them throughout the years. So as we all remember the professional work that she's done, I think I will at least, and I know most of the people that knew her at work will remember all of the personal things that she did. So Mary, congratulations. And if you'd like, you can unmute and say a few words to all of us.
Well, thank you, everyone. You know, we do great work at Montana Housing, and in the affordable housing community, and it's more important than ever now to work on that. I do miss working in it, but I am starting to figure out how to enjoy retirement, and we're going to do a lot of camping this summer. We've got 72 days reserved in campgrounds with our RV. So we're going to be having some fun, but I am sure that I know you guys will hear from me either as friend or who knows if I might pop up somewhere else. But anyway, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary. That's awesome.
Yes, congratulations, Mary. Thank you all awardees. Thank you, Cheryl and Bruce and Kaya, and just for presenting all those wonderful awards. I always love our award ceremony. I'm going rogue from our script because I always love our award ceremony because it makes me so excited about the work we do. We get really stuck in the weeds sometimes, but we are really all doing incredible work across the state. So congratulations to everyone contributing to that. We had planned to do a live voting for our People's Choice Award, but with the incredible response and number of nominees, we've had to modify our approach a little bit. We are posting a SurveyMonkey link in the chat. You will have until tomorrow at noon to vote by completing the survey. On the SurveyMonkey link, you will be able to choose up to 3 organizations, and the organization with the most votes will win the People's Choice Award. We did not include the for-profit entities, individuals, government entities, or conference organizers. That still left 44 organizations nominated. You all submitted wonderful nominations, and it was inspiring to see all the comments and support you had for the work of your peers. You can see all of the nominees on the Whova app under the Documents section, and also on the agenda page for the session with a description of why they were each nominated. We hope that you take some time to look at the nominees and consider who you would like to vote for. You will get to select 3, as I mentioned earlier. We will announce the winner via email tomorrow afternoon. The winner will receive a $3,000 prize toward a video about their organization or program specifically. Again, please vote via SurveyMonkey by tomorrow at noon, and that link should be popping up here in the chat shortly. We are now pleased to be joined by Sarah Elkins. Sarah is of Elkins Consulting, and she brings a wealth of knowledge from years of experience in both public and private sector work. She has a deep belief that each of us has our own story and a story to tell, and she's going to share more about that with us today. Sarah, we will turn the stage over to you. For all of you that were on for the award ceremony, you guys can pop off your video now, but make sure you still join us for Sarah's session. Thank you, Sarah, and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. What an inspiring beginning to my day to hear all the work, the amazing things that are going on in housing across the state of Montana. I'm so impressed and so pleased. I would love to share my screen. Michelle, can I do that so that I can move my own slides forward? I think you have to stop sharing for me to be able to share. Thank you. I've done that before where I had somebody else advancing my slides and it was not super smooth. So we're going to do it this way instead. So when I was in college, I was broke. And I know that's not surprising. Lots of college students are broke. I was so broke that when I didn't have money for food, my cat would eat before I would. And I drove this little gold VW Super Beetle with a sunroof. And so many people in Fort Collins, that's where I went to my undergrad, Colorado State University, so many people there knew my car. And there was one time when I was moving back from Colorado Springs, where my parents lived, back to Fort Collins. And I had this little kitten in my car. And he was so scared that he had climbed under the front seat, the passenger seat. And back then, that was a while ago, between Colorado Springs and Fort Collins was only Denver. And that was about halfway. And I was halfway between Denver and Fort Collins, which used to be a full hour to get between them. And there was nothing between them but farmland and a handful of gas stations here and there. Well, I was driving along with my bug full of all of my stuff because I was about to move into a studio apartment by myself. I was super excited about it because I wanted my own space. And it was actually a converted motel. It's called the Sunset Apartments. It used to be the Sunset Hotel. And it was so tiny, this little apartment, that I'm little, but it took me some real maneuvering to get in and out of the bathroom. It was so small. And I remember my landlord being very patient with me, which not all landlords are particularly patient, especially with college students. And I was moving back up and he was scheduled to meet me. And as I'm driving in the middle of nowhere on the highway on 25, I got a flat tire. And of course, if you know a VW Bug, you know my trunk, which is in the front, is where the spare tire was. And all of my stuff for my new apartment was in the trunk and in the car. So I opened up the trunk. I had to unload all of my stuff from there. I had to get the spare tire out. And as I get the spare tire out, I notice it's flat. Now I'm really in trouble. And the cat, the poor cat, is cowering under that front seat. And every time a truck would go by, my whole car would shake. So I finally flagged down somebody who was driving by on the frontage road adjacent to where I was parked. And he happened to have a car phone. Now, this was back in probably 1991. So they were unusual and it was expensive. It was like $250 per minute to use a car phone. Well, I made 2 calls that day. I called AAA to come and help me out of this mess. And I called my new landlord to let him know I was going to be late. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" This is a landlord I had met once when I went to look at the studio apartment. And he cared enough to show that kind of compassion immediately, the first thing out of his mouth. I will never forget that. So why do we tell stories? There are so many reasons, and it's not just entertainment, and it's not just to tell people about ourselves, but it does offer us an opportunity to think about the impact of the stories that happened in our lives on our current and future selves. In other words, when we look at the story from 2 years out or even 2 weeks out, we can figure out what kind of impact that experience might have had on us. I call it processing. Some people like to talk about marinating on things. And since I love to cook, that makes sense too. But I process stories differently. And believe it or not, the stories that you tell about yourself actually influence your own identity. So taking the time to tell a story after the fact helps you process the experience and identify how it's going to help you or not, and maybe even some of the patterns you're experiencing. Obviously, stories create strong connections between us. And the important thing here for today's plenary session is that stories have this great effect on demonstrating your values and your personal brand. So just to get started, I want you to think about a moment recently when you felt like you did something really well. Now, I call these rock star moments because I sing in a couple of bands, and there's something about getting off the stage and having people rush up to talk to you that makes you feel like a rock star. So this could also be more of a satisfying moment. It could be something that you did that you walked away and thought, yes, I nailed that. I feel really good about how I did that. It could be something as simple as having a conversation with your teenager that you were able to get more than a 1-word sentence out of them. It could be that you planted a bulb in the fall that you didn't think would come up. And just recently you looked in your yard and you saw that daffodil bulb come up, maybe before the deer ate it. Think about that moment. Think about who else was involved and try to put yourself in that place again. So you're feeling the sensation of deep satisfaction. I'm going to ask you to take a moment to think about this, and I want you to hold on to it because we're going to develop it over the next few minutes. The next thing that's important about storytelling is being intentional about your stories. Even when you're just interacting with somebody without telling stories, thinking about the impact you want to have on the people around you can help you identify the right story to share at the right time. So think about the next time you're having a conversation with somebody, how do you want it to end? Now, I do this with something as basic as a conversation with Verizon Wireless. Before I make a call, I actually jot down 3 things. If I'm concerned about something on my bill, I jot down the best case scenario, how this could end in the best case, where I get exactly what I want. I write down where I'm willing to compromise. What am I willing to give up in order to get something else out of this? And sometimes that is unexpected, depending on who is on the other end of the phone. Sometimes they present something that I wasn't thinking about, so I'm willing to compromise. And then the third is my deal breaker. Where do I hang up the phone and choose to change my provider? Now, I have to be willing to take big steps to do that. As we know in Montana and across the country, it's hard to get out of a contract. So you have to really think about whether you're going to be able to set that boundary, that limit, and actually do it. And I even do this with my children. Right before a conversation or during a conversation, I think about how I want it to end. And with my coaching clients, I think about how I want them to feel when we're finished with a conversation. So I have a poll for you. I think I have to stop sharing my screen in order for Michelle to have this poll. So Michelle, would you please put up that poll, the first one, about whether you can control what people think of you? I'm going to give you just a few minutes, or a few seconds, really. Do we have the poll coming up, Michelle? We can also just do this in the chat.
Sarah, she mentioned that the poll isn't working at this moment, so maybe we throw it to the chat.
Okay, well, let's throw it to the chat. And really just think about it. You don't have to answer it, but I like to have something for you to think about while we're having this conversation. So think about whether you think you can control what people think of you. My guess is that you're going to say no. You can't control what people think of you. Oh, there's the poll, it's working. So go ahead and answer on the poll whether you think you can control what people think of you. I'd have to stop my share. Have we gotten a lot of responses so far, Michelle?
This is Katie. Yeah, we have.
Okay.
We're at about 148 responses.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what is the general consensus here? Can you go ahead and close the poll?
Yep, I'll end it. 71% is no.
Okay.
8% is yes, and 3% is I don't know.
So I would say, and according to research, you can't control what people think of you because you can't control somebody else's thoughts. So let's put up the next poll while we're at it. And the question is, can you influence what people think of you? We'll just wait a few seconds and see what happens with that. Katie, you can let me know when we've had a lot of participation in this.
Yeah, so we're at 97% yes, and 2% no, and 1% does not know.
Excellent. There we go. And of course, I'm a believer that we can influence how people perceive us. And there are lots of ways that we can do that. So let's put up the next one, which is a Q&A basically. Here we go. When does it matter what people think of you? I've heard many people say, I don't care what people think of me. And that's okay, obviously. There are times when you do care what people think of you, like your children or your mother. When you post something on Facebook and you think, oh, I wouldn't want my mom to see that. Clearly you care what she thinks of you. So if you could put in your answer here, and then I'll wait about 10 more seconds. Okay, what do you think, Kaya? All of the above looks like it got the majority, 86%. Excellent. Now in the chat or wherever you are, think about why these matter. And have you thought about this in the past? Is this something that you've considered in the past, that it matters in certain cases what people think of you? Just think about that for a second. And I'm going to go back to my slides. We're going to move forward. All right. So let's talk about how we influence what people think of us, especially in advocacy. In your advocacy world, you kind of have to, right? As a leader, wherever you stand, whether you are a maintenance person on the facility or whether you are managing the facility, you can lead from wherever you are. So when we talk about influencing what people think of us, I like to think about your values. So think about for a second, the words that you would want people to use to describe you after they've walked away from an interaction with you. And what I'm going to ask you to do, I did put a worksheet up on the Hova app, and I don't know if you downloaded it, but if you didn't, just take a piece of paper next to you. And I want you to think about 3 words that you would want people to use to describe you when you walk away. And these are just some examples. Sometimes it's hard to get started in this, but think about which 3 words and just start with 3, because this is going to be an easier way to actually use this and apply this, is to just start with 3. The reason I have a picture of my older son on this slide is because a few years back when he was 19, I was putting together a presentation that was similar to this. And I asked him, if you could choose 1 word that you would want somebody to describe you with when you walked away, what would it be? And without a moment's hesitation, he said, reliable. He was 19. And let me tell you, he is extremely reliable. When a boss asks him to do something and he says he's going to do it, he will get it done and he'll do it well. He is extremely reliable. So I'm going to be quiet for about 5 or 8 seconds and let you think. Now use the words that are at the top of your head. Don't try too hard. Don't make it too intense. Just jot down the 3 words. All right. Now, here's the key to influencing the perception of others. Your values have to be in alignment with your actions. You must demonstrate those values in your everyday words and activities. So if you want to be known as friendly, you're going to have to remember to open the door for the person behind you and not let it slam on them when you're going into the grocery store or the bank. If you want to be known as considerate, you're going to have to remember to pick up after your dog. Because if you're not, and you're leaving that dog's stuff on the trail where somebody's going to step in it and track it into their house, you're not a considerate person. So think hard about how those words that you just jotted down can be demonstrated in your everyday activities. And I'll give you an example. I was doing this presentation a couple of years ago, something similar to this, and I asked people to do this exercise. It's a really valuable exercise. And even if you've done this with me at a previous event, I encourage you to do this exercise at least every year, if not more often, because our values don't change, but the order in which we want them to be seen may make adjustments throughout our lives. So when I was doing this exercise with a large group in person, there was a woman at a back table. There were probably 300 people in the room. And a woman in the back table, I asked her to share one of the words that was on her list. And she had her arms crossed in front of her and she was leaning back at the table. And she said, friendly, just like that, without a smile on her face. And everyone in the audience turned to see where that sound came from. And you could kind of see a little bit of a chuckle going on throughout the room. The people right at her table who knew her all nodded vigorously. They all knew she was friendly. But to the rest of us, that didn't appear to be a super friendly way to say the word friendly. So think about how that aligns, what words you use and words you want to be used, and how that aligns with your behavior, your body language, your language. All right, so here's the thing. If you have to tell people you're friendly or authentic or a good cook, you're probably not doing it right. You don't need to tell people these things, but there are times when you can't actively demonstrate these things, like in an interview, or if I wanted to tell you I was a good cook, but I couldn't provide any food for you. So the way that I might do that would be to tell you a story of something that I cooked. My husband and I installed a wood-burning pizza oven in our backyard a few years back, and it took us a while to really perfect the Tuscan-style pizza that was coming out of it. The beauty was that we were a great team. It took me about 3 months to figure out the crust, and it took my husband a few times of using that giant spatula called a pizza peel to be able to continually turn the pizza so that it didn't crisp up too much on one side or get charred, because the oven was 700 degrees. So I remember when we finally perfected the crust and the toppings, and he put this pizza in the oven and it came out and the crust had bubbled up on the sides and had crisped up. And the browned butter and chopped up sage had gotten so melty on the top, and a little bit of goat cheese chev on top. It was amazing. And when we broke it, you could feel the crisp of the outer crust, but the inside was the elasticy texture that you really want in a Tuscan style pizza. It was amazing. So I just told a story that absolutely demonstrates I'm a good cook. I don't need to tell you I'm a good cook. So think about that in your everyday activities. So these are our boys, and some of you from Helena may actually recognize them. We've been here a long time. The picture on the left was a few hours before we left for the science circus, which is always at Helena High School. And these boys loved the science circus. They love science in general. And then on the right is a more recent picture of them. Well, when the boys were little, like in the picture to the left, we would spend every night with dinner together. We always ate in the dining room together. And there was a time when we were extremely house poor, where I was mostly at home with the boys. I had started my business, but I wasn't doing it a lot. And my husband was working for a nonprofit and was dropped to half salary. Now, I hadn't paid the mortgage that month yet, and I knew we were getting half the paycheck that we were expecting. Things were tight. And after a couple months, things were really tight, and I didn't see an end in sight. I remember going to the grocery store one day. I asked my neighbor, who was 13 at the time, to come and watch the boys so that I could go to the grocery store and just have a few minutes by myself. I was stressed. I hadn't been this broke since college. And when I was in college, it was just me not eating. I couldn't not feed my children. I remember going to the grocery store with a budget in my head. And I was standing between the milk on one side and the eggs on the other. I held my breath for a moment. And I vividly remember a tear coming down the side of my face. Now, I'm not a crier. I had held it together for a couple months at this point, but something triggered a really stressful, sad moment in me. And I cried a little right there in the grocery store because I had to decide between buying milk or buying eggs. It was really stressful. I got myself together. I decided on milk. And when I got home that evening, we had cereal for dinner. Cereal for dinner. That is not something my children had any expectation of. And they were thrilled. I remember sitting at the dinner table and my husband kind of gave me a funny look. I gave him some leftovers from the night before because I knew he wouldn't tolerate cereal for dinner. But the boys and I were eating cereal and they thought it was the best thing ever. It was such a novelty. It wasn't something that they had experienced before in our household. And they were thrilled with it. They were laughing. They were telling little pun jokes about cereal, about grains, and then somehow it got into fish puns. I don't even know how that happened. But I can tell you there was a moment during that dinner when I leaned back and I realized that we were going to be okay. I didn't know when the end would be in sight for our finances, but I did know that even if we had to sell the house and move into something smaller, I had what was really important right there at the dinner table with me. It was a powerful moment. And I was suddenly filled with this gratitude and joy at just having that moment. So storytelling. We all know storytellers that go on too long. We all know storytellers who add far too much detail, or storytellers who don't tell enough of a story and you're left wanting more. So the question is, what are the difficulties in storytelling? I'd love for you to answer this question, and I'll stop my share so that Kaya or Michelle can put up this poll. The question is, what is the hardest part for you when you're sharing a story? I'd love for you to tell all of us. Obviously, this is anonymous, so although some people already know what you're good at and what you're not good at in terms of storytelling. Go ahead and answer this question. I'm going to give it about 8 seconds. All right. The answers are in. Going on too long, adding too much detail is definitely the majority of you. Knowing which story to share. I find that when I am working with people, coaching clients, knowing which story to share can be really tricky. You have to really know your audience to be able to know what story to share. My father was known for going into far too much detail. He would tell me the names of his neighbors and then the names of his neighbors' kids and his neighbors' dogs before he'd get to the point of the story. There was a time when I was telling a story to one of my nieces and my brother was watching. And at some point, he looked at me, he said, "Sarah, land the plane." That's when I knew I had gone on a little bit too long. Not enough detail. That means that you haven't brought the person with you into the story. Losing the thread just means that you not only went on too long, but you went into a different direction. You took the fork in the road and you had a hard time coming back to the main path. And then gauging the audience's response. I think you might be surprised at how important that is. And maybe that would have been your second choice when you filled out that poll. So let's make sure that I am sharing my screen so that we can move forward again. All right. So here's the thing about storytelling. It can be really entertaining. You can use storytelling to be persuasive. But the real magic in sharing the right story at the right time, particularly if you are advocating for somebody or for an issue that you feel very strongly about, the most important aspect of sharing your story is uncovering the story of the person in front of you. So when I told that story of my boys sitting at the dining room table and laughing their heads off, being super excited about cereal for dinner, the intent of sharing that story, the intention was for it to trigger a memory that you had of your life. So all those details that went into telling the story of standing in the grocery store, standing between the milk and the eggs, and trying to decide which one I would buy that day, that is meant to bring you there so you're standing next to me. And so that you can uncover one of your own stories. Now, we all know that one of the most dangerous parts of listening to somebody else's story is that our story is going to pop into our head and we're going to want to share it. How many of you in the chat, how many of you have that problem where somebody's telling a story and you find yourself kind of losing track of their story because you're thinking of the story that you want to share? Go ahead, put it in the chat. Say, yep, that's me. I do that all the time. We can't help that. It's absolutely the most natural human experience to do that. And the reason is that we have what's called mirror neurons. So when somebody is telling a story and it's a joyful story that we can relate to, our neurons, our brain actually mirrors the brain activity of the person who's telling us the story. So when I tell a story of joy, you have a sense of joy. You feel it. You can't help yourself. But when you are advocating and when you are leading, the intention has to be to uncover the story of the person in front of you. It can't be just about you. It has to be about them. And what I like to say is that to be a good storyteller, you have to be a good story listener. And that means sometimes hearing what isn't being said. So whether that is somebody at work or a kid at home, you know when you're not listening intently. And there are times when we just can't, when our brain is just too overloaded, too stimulated, we can't do it. But believe it or not, you can even actively listen via Zoom. So we're going to talk a little bit about listening to understand. Now, I'm guessing that because of the work you do, many of you understand the techniques of active listening. The question is, are we practicing it enough? My theory is that in general, because of the polarized condition of our communities, we aren't listening to understand as much as we need to. So when you are getting ready to share a story, remember in that poll, I said, sometimes it's really probably the second most important thing in sharing a story is observing your audience, right? It might even be the most important thing. So your body language and your eye contact has to be there. Obviously, some people are better with eye contact than others, and that's fine as long as your facial expressions are matching what you're talking about. If you're telling a sad story and you're smiling, you might miss that mirroring opportunity. If you're telling a happy story and you're not smiling, again, you're missing an opportunity to have their mirror neurons correlate so that we can all be smiling and feeling that joy. So your facial expressions. When you're actively listening, if you repeat something back to somebody like, oh, I heard you say, or ask a clarifying question, is this what you meant when you said? If you can do that in a way that doesn't feel judgmental, then you will open up that line of communication in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise, especially when you've shared a story that already connected you. It builds trust, it builds confidence that you're coming at it from a perspective of helpfulness and compassion. Always, always approach these conversations with curiosity. Again, it's not about judgment. If we're listening to understand, we have to take that step back and ask questions from a place of curiosity. Sometimes that's hard, and that's why it's so important to practice. So when I say watch for cues, I'm talking about when you're at the grocery store and you run into somebody you know, and you start talking and you're telling them a story. This might just be me projecting, but I'm sure some of you can relate to this. You notice that they start to take a couple steps back, or they turn to see if somebody's near them, or you can look at them and see their feet start to point a direction that's not facing you. Maybe they cross their arms. All of these cues are telling you something. When you look for them, you have an opportunity, again, to create a much deeper connection with the person in front of you. There is an opportunity to maybe say, oh my gosh, just like my brother said, I need to land the plane. So here's the end of my story. How are things with you? Or even, oh, I'm sorry, I went on and on. I've been so overwhelmed lately. What's going on with you? You can take that back step without digging yourself into a deep hole by just ending that story very quickly. All right, let's go to the next part. My title of my podcast and my book is Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. And I'd love to back this up with an explanation of where that came from. When I first started this coaching business that I do with Gallup StrengthsFinder and storytelling, I had a coaching client that was asking me about how to share her story without including the fact that she had MS. It's such a scary and painful disability. And she said, I just don't want to include that as I'm writing and as I'm doing my public speaking. I don't want to include anything about my MS. And I asked her why. And she said, well, I don't want to be defined by my disability. She didn't want to be the woman who has MS. She didn't want to be described that way. You know, that inspirational speaker who has MS. That's not what she wanted. And it took me a moment to really understand where she was coming from and to put it into a perspective that made sense to me. And I said to her, Maria, every story you've told me related to your MS has defined you in my eyes as resilient, persistent, ambitious, and compassionate. I don't see you as the woman who has MS. I see you as a woman who has MS, who happens to be persistent and resilient and powerful and compassionate. So it's not the story that is defining you, it's how you're talking about it. And it took me a while to process that. As I mentioned early on, sometimes telling the story helps you process or marinate on the impact of it, whatever patterns might be showing up. Well, when I told that story a few times over the next few days, this title came to me. Your stories don't define you, how you tell them will. So if you are talking to people about hardship and you don't get to the part about how you succeeded, how you managed to be resilient, then you're missing half the opportunity to shift the story in your own mind, as well as shifting how people perceive you. So these are pictures of me singing on a stage and a picture of my mother and me on Mount Helena. And the reason I included these is because I really didn't ever see myself singing in a band. I was 40 when I started singing in a rock band for the first time in my life. I never saw myself doing that. So when my mom came to visit, about 5 years into this time that I had been singing with this band, we were standing in my kitchen making beef jerky from scratch. And she looked at me and said, oh my gosh, Sarah, if you had told me 10 years ago, I'd be standing in your kitchen in Montana making beef jerky, I never would have believed you. And I laughed. I said, we put up pickles last month. It was a good moment to remind myself how far I had come, how many things had changed since we moved from Washington, D.C. to Montana so many years ago. But here was the kicker. I said to my mom, you know, if you had told me 10 years ago, I'd be singing in a rock band in go-go boots and mini dresses, there's no way I would have believed you. And she looked at me thoughtfully and said, I'd believe that. So think back on your rock star moment. This is where I would love for you to take a few moments and think about that rock star moment and maybe come up with a few other satisfying moments on your list. Think about this for a few seconds. I'll give you a few seconds and jot down the stories that popped into your head as I was telling you my stories. So begin with something about something satisfying that you did, something satisfying that happened. Maybe a person in your life that really was pivotal and some interaction that you had with them. So I'm thinking particularly about my landlord, who was so kind, and the man who let me make 2 phone calls from his car phone. Think about the stories that that story triggered. Think about the stories that my story about our boys sitting at the dining room table eating cereal triggered, and jot down just a phrase or a few words so that you can remember later and add more detail. What you're doing now is you're beginning your story portfolio. This is an important aspect of storytelling if you don't know which story to share when, or if you have a tendency to go on too long. You can pinpoint the moment that was important in the story and the story that demonstrates certain aspects of your character that you want people to know about you. Kaya and Katie, is there anything coming up in the chat that people are sharing?
Not yet, but we'll continue to monitor it.
Okay. So if you're comfortable with this, I would love for you to share your phrase of a story that was triggered from my first story about my landlord who was kind. Anybody add something in the chat about that? The first story that I shared about my landlord and my little gold super beetle and my kitten that I had in the car. And if you could add that to the chat, that would be great.
Sarah, you wanted me to read some of these out for you?
That would be great. Thank you.
So we have cross-country solo motorcycle, been stuck on I-25 several times, including in a VW bug.
But you're going to have to reach out to me so we can compare notes.
Yeah. When given a chance, people who will surprise you with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
First neighbor.
Oh.
My first car was a Geo Metro that leaked, so I'd have to vacuum out the water with a shop vac every time it rained in Olympia, Washington. So it rained a lot.
It's like an everyday situation.
It was a tire story as well. Strangers stopping and changing it for me and my 80-year-old mom.
Oh.
Living with roommates in college on our own for the first time. My flat tire in the middle of Chicago housing projects in 1976.
Ooh.
When my church paid for my broken down van. The state patrol officer who stopped and helped change a flat tire. People of the good old days. Someone was actually thinking about all the bad experiences with landlords.
Mm.
A daughter that got a flat on the side of the interstate, so she called me to help her out. Her spare was flat too. Silver lining is everywhere if you look hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about the time I was poor in college, living with the worst roommate ever.
We all have one of those stories, I think.
Yeah. And feel free to tell me when to stop. We've got about 20 more of them.
Let's do 5 more.
Okay. Tenant so happy about new home apartment. She gave me a big hug and thank you for all the help. Mm-hmm. My speeding ticket turned into my son's dinner request. My friend leaning out the window of my bright yellow bug driving from Belgrade to Bozeman in the winter, scraping my windshield.
I have that memory too.
Spending the last year with my wife's life as she was dying of cancer. And
So
neighbors,
go ahead.
Neighbors who helped me out when my husband was deployed. There you go.
So the kindness of strangers, that seems to be the theme here, the kindness of strangers. So here's one of the things that always surprises me about storytelling. When I shared that story of my landlord, there were a few words that popped into your head about that landlord. And as I'm listening to your stories, the state patrol officer that stopped to help you with a flat, these kindness of strangers stories, think about the words you would use to describe them. Now, when I told that story, My guess is that some of the words that came into your head about my landlord and about the man who stopped and let me use his very expensive minutes on his car phone were probably things like generous, caring, compassionate, maybe thoughtful. There are so many words that could pop into your head. And here's the powerful thing about that. You don't know these people. None of you know my landlord, as far as I know. I don't even know where he is at this point. And yet you have these words to describe him based on the story that I told you. So when your values are in alignment and you are sharing stories that demonstrate those values, your character, your natural talents and strengths, when you share those stories, think about the impact that that has on the perception of the people around you. And then think about the stories you're sharing in the context of what are people thinking of the characters in your story? And what stories are people telling about you? Now, again, we cannot control what other people think of us. It's just not possible. But we can influence those things. And the more we listen, even if we have to start tomorrow, if we know we haven't been in alignment with our values, we haven't been good listeners, if we start tomorrow and make small, conscious, intentional steps to put those things back in alignment, then when people tell stories about us, those are the words that will pop into their listeners' heads. Now, everyone knows Montana is a small town with a giant main street. So around here, everyone knows everyone. It's rare for me to go anywhere in the state and not run into either someone I know or someone who knows someone I know. And in the world of housing, it's even smaller. So the more intentional you are with how you are being perceived and making sure that your values are aligned with your behavior and your actions, then you can influence in very positive ways how you're being perceived. I'm going to give you one suggestion when we're talking about active listening, whether it's online or in person. This is something I did with my sons a couple years ago, and I realized it had a huge impact. My boys were teenagers at the time. Now they're both 20 and 22, which is crazy because I'm still 30. I don't know how that happened, but I remember when my older son was a senior in high school and my younger son was a sophomore. And I had my phone. I was sitting at my dining room table and I had my phone and I was checking email or whatever I was doing. And my older son came up to talk to me. And I remember I consciously wanted to make sure that I was paying attention to him because we had some issues in the past with miscommunication, and I wanted to make absolutely sure I heard what he was saying. So I took my phone and I literally took one look. I hit the button so I could see what time it was. So I looked at my phone, I saw what time it was, and I intentionally turned my phone face down and put it down on the dining room table. And I looked straight up at him. And you would have been so surprised to see the expression on his face. He saw what I did. He saw the intention behind it. And at 18, you'd be surprised that a kid would be that observant, but he was. We talked for maybe 3 minutes and he said, "Okay, thanks, Mom." And I wasn't sure what he was thanking me for, but I knew that we had an understanding in that moment, and he left the house. A few days later, he came back and we were in the same position, but I was in the middle of writing an email to somebody. I had my laptop open and my phone next to me. And he said, "Mom, I have a question." And I looked at him, I said, "Jacob, give me 30 seconds to finish this thought. Please just give me 30 seconds. He said, "Yeah, okay." So literally 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds went by. I looked at him, I looked at my phone, and I did the same thing. Checked the time so that I would absolutely know, because how many of us, we check the time and then we have to check it again because we weren't really focused. So I checked the time with intention. Again, took the back of my phone and placed it face down on the table. And I looked straight at him and said, Okay, what's up? You could have seen the relief on his face. His shoulders dropped, and he actually sat down in the chair next to me and talked to me. So I know that this works. If it works with an 18-year-old boy, it will work with anyone. If you can be intentional, give yourself a cue about listening actively, without judgment and with curiosity, you will change your relationships, guaranteed. I always like to remind people that you are an ambassador for your people. Whether you're a woman, a man, whatever ethnicity you have, whatever background you have, whatever religion you have, whether you're a mother or a mother of fur babies, at any given time, you represent your organization and your people. It's not fair and it's exhausting sometimes, but you are always on and you are always an ambassador. There are going to be days when you step out of bed into a pile of dog vomit and it's going to be a hard morning. Guaranteed, you're going to have a struggle for a little bit. So that's human. You're not going to always project the values you want to project. But if you're intentional and you're consistent, you will change and improve relationships, especially with people you generally have conflict with. So you are an ambassador. Think about how you want to be perceived. Go back to that exercise. You can go through that worksheet. There are 4 pages to that workbook. Go back to that and really think about how you want to be perceived. Remember that every interaction is an opportunity to shift whatever perception that person might have of you or those people if you're in a meeting. What is your ultimate goal as a human being when you spend time with other humans? I can tell you, my ultimate goal is that I leave conversations better than I found them. When I'm working with a coaching client, I want this to end in a way that they feel good about themselves. That's the key. That something in our conversation triggered confidence, triggered a sense of safety, and maybe inspiration to do something a little differently tomorrow. That's how I want every interaction to end. And now use your story portfolio. Start to build it out. In the breakout session that I'm going to start at 11, that's what we'll be talking about. Building out that story portfolio so that you have a selection of stories to use when you need to. That could be online as a social media issue or a social media strategy. It could be face-to-face. It could be in a meeting. It could be one-to-one in a conversation with somebody that you struggle with a connection with. You start that story portfolio and think about the stories that actually demonstrate aspects of your personality, aspects of your character and your values, and maybe the things that you are really good at. How can you build that story portfolio to demonstrate your character, your values, and your vision in a clear and effective and connected way with your audience? Here's the key, friends. Your stories don't have to be epic. They just have to be meaningful. So my story about standing in the aisle between the milk and the eggs, that's not an epic story. I didn't nearly die. I didn't spot a celebrity. But it was meaningful to you, and it triggered memories of your own experiences. So don't feel like you don't have stories just because they're not epic, just because it's not a roller coaster ride. Remember that your stories that are meaningful to you, when told in a meaningful way that creates an emotional connection, will be far more effective at developing advocacy and as a leader to inspire the people around you. Those are the emotional connecting stories that will work. We have just a few minutes for you to either share your thoughts about what we talked about today, or to maybe ask any questions. So now would be a perfect time for a Q&A.
And just a reminder to all attendees, you are kind of in listen only mode. So if you do have questions, please throw them in the chat and I'll ask Sarah for you. Sarah, you're getting a lot of thanks in the chat right now. That was
Excellent, thank you.
fantastic. We'll give a couple more seconds. Great presentation. Cheryl, or there is a question from Cheryl. How do you decide what is overshare and too personal for the audience?
That is such a good question, Cheryl. Thank you for asking that. I have been accused of oversharing. One of my best friends in the world told me that the first time we met, our conversation was about breastfeeding. Yeah, so sometimes that's a little bit of an overshare. You can tell by the comfort level of the person in front of you, Cheryl. If you are starting down a path of oversharing, then you can tell if you're paying attention to your audience. Again, we come back to the observation rule, that if you can take a step back and really pay attention, you can see if they're starting to cross their arms in front of them or cross their legs, or they're turning slightly away from you. That's when you're oversharing. And it's really easy to back off on that. You can actually just say, oh my gosh, I'm oversharing. Let's switch direction. People really appreciate that level of vulnerability and humanity when you can acknowledge that you've stepped into the wrong place.
That's great. Another question. We live in a phone world right now, in Zoom world. Over the phone conversations, what cues can be helpful to understand the other person's point of view?
Another great question. I actually did a couple of free active listening webinars at the very beginning of the pandemic back in April of last year. And that was often the question, how do you make sure you're paying attention and the other person's paying attention? Well, first, wherever possible, try to use video. I know it's exhausting to use video because your brain is actually working so much harder to pick up subtle cues on video than in person. But if you can, especially if it's a difficult conversation with potential for conflict, it's better to have the video on and to make sure that you can see each other. So if you're questioning whether your video is looking good, take your finger and point until you cover the camera so you know exactly where to look so that you can see that, so the person knows that you're looking at them. And one of my tricks that I use is I actually squeeze the Zoom box or the video box so that the person I'm talking to, their image is right below the camera. So I can actually look right at them when I'm talking to them. That is my best trick when it comes to my client interactions on Zoom. As far as the phone is concerned, paying attention is so much more important with the phone that sometimes I actually close my laptop and turn my phone upside down and have a piece of paper and pen with me. And I'm listening so much more intently when I do that. And you can ask the other person to do that as well. You can say, this is a really important conversation to me. Can you please shut down any distractions and maybe just take a pen and paper so that we can talk this through? Again, that level of vulnerability is appreciated. The direct, honest approach is often so underestimated in terms of building connection.
Oh, I was muted. How long did it take for you to write your book, and what was the most difficult thing about writing it?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. It took me about 8 months to really finish the book. The first half of the book only took me a few months. It was the last half, probably 30 or 40% of it took double the time as the first part. And that's because if you're familiar with StrengthsFinder, I have strategic and activator as my top strengths, and adaptability is up there as well. And what I found was that I had a really hard time keeping myself accountable. With activator and adaptability, it means that I like to switch gears regularly. So I tried to pay attention to all of the articles about how to write your book and what real writers do. And all of them, their advice was things like, have a routine, get up early, do it the same place every day for a certain amount of time, get your cup of tea and have a routine and develop that routine. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have adaptability as my number 5 strength. I don't even know what routine means in my life. So what I did find that helped me a lot was I thought in terms of, if I were coaching somebody of my strengths to finish a book, what would I say to them? What strategies could we come up with together? And I realized the best strategy for me was to actually schedule 15 to 20 minute increments of time throughout my calendar, 2 or 3 times a day at random intervals. So wherever I was at that time when my alarm would go off, I would open up my laptop and start typing. And if I was in flow, I wouldn't stop. And I had never scheduled anything for the next 45 minutes or so after. But if I typed for 15 minutes and wasn't feeling motivated or inspired, I would close my laptop and walk away. That was the hardest part for me. I have 0 executing domain strengths, which means that I'm really good at starting projects. I'm not so good at maintaining things or continuing to finish them, which is why I've surrounded myself with people that can help me with those strengths, those talents.
That's fantastic. We'll finish with one last question. Any advice on communicating with people who are inconsistent with their own messaging and communication?
Yes. Well, first of all, I spent about 20 years in public sector. I started in federal agencies implementing PeopleSoft at the Federal Reserve and at World Bank and an NSA and the Department of Education in DC, and talk about inconsistency. And then I moved to Montana and I worked for a few years at the state library and a few years at the university system. And then I worked in the city of Helena for a few years and talk about inconsistencies. The best thing I can tell you is that sometimes you have to be really good at documentation. So after you've had a conversation with somebody, you don't want to have every conversation via email. That just doesn't work. You can't make decisions that way, and you can't develop a good connection with somebody like that. So I'd encourage you that after every conversation with this person, you jot down a handful of bullet points in an email and say, just to confirm this is what we talked about, please let me know if I misunderstood anything. That is the only way to develop consistency for people, is to do that. And then if they know you're going to do that after every conversation, they may actually review the notes before they have another conversation. Or you can say, okay, the last time we talked, this is what we talked about. Have you changed your mind? Because then it makes them accountable for their behavior in a way that saying, oh yeah, this is fine, doesn't. I hope that answers the question.
Keep getting mute. Thank you so much. I hope you have a few minutes to scroll through the chat because there's such wonderful praise and thanks to you, including someone who wants to know if you've done a TED Talk. And also a lady whose kids went to daycare with your kids way back when. So.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's wonderful being with this particular group. I have to say, I've been excited and nervous for the last 2 months thinking about this, planning this, because I know there are a lot of people that I love that are sitting in there watching. And so of course, knowing that people you love are out there gives you great comfort, but it also puts on a little more pressure. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this.
Yeah, wonderful. I really appreciate how you encourage each of us to think about why and how we tell the stories we do, the reminder that stories unite us, and just the reminder that the impact of intentional relationships and intentional listening is vital. So thank you for inspiring us and leaving us with a little bit of your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll see you at 11.
Yeah, we now have a 30-minute break before the 11 a.m. breakout sessions. And as Sarah mentioned, she is one of the ones doing an 11 a.m. breakout. All session links can be found in Whova. We have 2 sets of breakouts today, one at 11 and one at 1. And then we look forward to seeing you all back for our closing plenary at 2:30. But before we go, we want to draw 2 more names for our raffle prizes. So Michelle, you can hit spin on the first one. We're spinning. There's a lot of names on that wheel. Diaz Horn. I'm going to totally butcher your name, but you are our first winner, and we're going to pick one more winner today. Brittany Palmer, you're our second one. So Michelle Rogers will be in touch with you to get your addresses for sending off your raffle prizes. Enjoy your breakout sessions, and we will see you guys back together at 2:30 today. Have a great day, guys.